The Namibian Constitution, narrated by Apple Light. Chapter 3, Fundamental Human Rights and Freedoms, Part 3. Article 19, Culture. Every person shall be entitled to enjoy, practice, profess, maintain, and promote any culture, language, tradition, or religion subject to the terms of this Constitution, and further subject to the condition that the rights protected by this article do not impinge upon the rights of others or the national interest. Article 20. Education. 1. All persons shall have the right to education. 2. Primary education shall be compulsory, and the state shall provide reasonable facilities to render effective this right for every resident within Namibia by establishing and maintaining state schools at which primary education will be provided free of charge. 3. Children shall not be allowed to leave school until they have completed their primary education or have attained the age of 16 years, whichever is the sooner, save in so far as this may be authorized by Act of Parliament on grounds of health or other considerations pertaining to the public interest. 4. All persons shall have the right, at their own expense, to establish and to maintain private schools or colleges or other institutions of tertiary education, provided that a. Such schools, colleges, or institutions of tertiary education are registered with the government department in accordance with any law authorizing and regulating such registration. b. The standards maintained by such schools, colleges, or institutions of tertiary education are not inferior to the standards maintained in comparable schools, colleges, or institutions of tertiary education funded by the state. c. No restrictions of whatever nature are imposed with respect to the admission of pupils based on race, color, or creed. d. No restrictions of whatever nature are imposed with respect to the recruitment of staff based on race or color. Article 21. Fundamental Freedoms. All persons shall have the right to a. Freedom of speech and expression, which shall include freedom of the press and other media. b. Freedom of thought, conscience, and belief, which shall include academic freedom in institutions of higher learning. c. Freedom to practice any religion and to manifest such practice. d. Assemble peaceably and without arms. e. Freedom of association, which shall include freedom to form and join associations or unions, including trade unions and political parties. f. Withhold their labor without being exposed to criminal penalties. g. Move freely throughout Namibia. h. Reside and settle in any part of Namibia. I. Leave and return to Namibia. And j. Practice any profession, to carry on any occupation, trade, or business. 2. The fundamental freedoms referred to in Subarticle 1 hereof shall be exercised subject to the law of Namibia, insofar as such law imposes reasonable restrictions on the exercise of the rights and freedoms conferred by the said subarticle, which are necessary in a democratic society and are required in the interests of the sovereignty and integrity of Namibia, national security, public order, decency or morality, or in relation to contempt of court, defamation, or incitement to an offense. Article 22. Limitation upon fundamental rights and freedoms. Whenever, in terms of this Constitution, the limitation of any fundamental rights or freedoms contempted by this chapter is authorized, any law providing for such limitation shall a. Be of general application, shall not negate the essential content thereof, and shall not be aimed at a particular individual. b. Specify the ascertainable extent of such limitation, and identify the article or articles hereof on which authority to enact such limitation is claimed to rest. Article 23. Apartheid and affirmative action. 1. The practice of racial discrimination and the practice and ideology of apartheid, from which the majority of the people of Namibia have suffered for so long, shall be prohibited, and by Act of Parliament, such practices and the propagation of such practices may be rendered criminally punishable by the ordinary courts by means of such punishment as Parliament deems necessary for the purposes of expressing the revulsion of the Namibian people at such practices. 2. Nothing contained in Article 10 hereof shall prevent Parliament from enacting legislation providing directly or indirectly for the advancement of persons within Namibia who have been socially, economically, or educationally disadvantaged by past discriminatory laws or practices, or for the implementation of policies and programs aimed at redressing social, economic, or educational imbalances in the Namibian society arising out of past discriminatory laws or practices, or for achieving a balanced structuring of the public service, the defense force, the police force, and the correctional service. Open bracket. Sub-Article 2 is amended by the Namibian Constitution Second Amendment Act 7 of 2010. Close bracket. 3. In the enactment of legislation and the application of any policies and practices complemented by Subarticle 2 hereof, it shall be permissible to have regard to the fact that women in Namibia have traditionally suffered special discrimination and that they need to be encouraged and enabled to play a full, equal, and effective role in the political, social, economic, and cultural life of the nation. Article 24. Derogation. 1. Nothing contained in or under the authority of Article 26 hereof shall be held to be inconsistent with or in contravention of this Constitution to the extent that it authorizes the taking of measures during any period when Namibia is in a state of national defense or any period when a declaration of emergency under this Constitution is in force. 2. Where any persons are detained by virtue of such authorization as is referred to in Subarticle 1 hereof, the following provisions shall apply. A. They shall, as soon as reasonably practicable, and in any case not more than 5 days after the commencement of their detention, be furnished with a statement in writing in a language that they understand, specifying in detail the grounds upon which they are detained, and, at their request, this statement shall be read to them. B. Not more than 14 days after the commencement of their detention, a notification shall be published in the Gazette stating that they have been detained and giving particulars of the provision of law under which their detention is authorized. C. Not more than 1 month after the commencement of their detention, and thereafter during their detention at intervals of not more than 3 months, their cases shall be reviewed by the advisory board referred to in Article 26, 5c hereof, which shall order their release from detention if it is satisfied that it is not reasonably necessary for the purposes of the emergency to continue the detention of such persons. D. They shall be afforded such opportunity for the making of representations as may be desirable or expedient in the circumstances, having regard to the public interest and the interests of the detained persons. 3. Nothing contained in this article shall permit a derogation from or suspension of the fundamental rights or freedoms referred to in Articles 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, 15, 18, 19, and 21, 1a, b, c, and e hereof, or the denial of access by any persons to legal practitioners or a court of law. Open bracket. The word, quote, practitioners, close quote, is misspelt in the Government Gazette as reproduced above. Close bracket. Article 25. Enforcement of fundamental rights and freedoms. 1. Save in so far as it may be authorized to do so by this Constitution, Parliament or any subordinate legislative authority shall not make any law, and the executive and the agencies of government shall not take any action which abolishes or abridges the fundamental rights and freedoms conferred by this chapter, and any law or action in contravention thereof shall, to the extent of the contravention, be invalid, provided that a competent court, instead of declaring such law or action to be invalid, shall have the power and the discretion in an appropriate case to allow Parliament, any subordinate legislative authority, or the executive and the agencies of government, as the case may be, to correct any defect in the impugned law or action within a specified period, subject to such conditions as may be specified by it. In such event, and until such correction, or until the expiry of the time limit set by the court, whichever be the shorter, such impugned law or action shall be deemed to be valid. B. Any law which was in force immediately before the date of independence shall remain in force until amended, repealed, or declared unconstitutional. If a competent court is of the opinion that such law is unconstitutional, it may either set aside the law or allow Parliament to correct any defect in such law, in which event the provisions of subarticle A hereof shall apply. 2. Aggrieved persons who claim that a fundamental right or freedom guaranteed by this Constitution has been infringed or threatened shall be entitled to approach a competent court to enforce or protect such a right or freedom, and may approach the Ombudsman to provide them with such legal assistance or advice as they require, and the Ombudsman shall have the discretion in response thereto to provide such legal or other assistance as he or she may consider expedient. 3. Subject to provisions of this Constitution, the court referred to in subarticle 2 hereof shall have the power to make all such orders as shall be necessary and appropriate to secure such applicants the enjoyment of the rights and freedoms conferred on them under the provisions of this Constitution, should the court come to the conclusion that such rights or freedoms have been unlawfully denied or violated, or that grounds exist for the protection of such rights or freedoms by interdict. 4. The power of the court shall include the power to award monetary compensation in respect of any damage suffered by the aggrieved persons in consequence of such unlawful denial or violation of their fundamental rights and freedoms, where it considers such an award to be appropriate in the circumstances of particular cases. Thank you for listening to today's audio. I hope you're finding this series useful and informative. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Until the next chapter.